just in case you are not a woman in her 40s, I'm going to tell you a little bit about what shows up in my feed and some of the most popular posts that I see these days, which is usually a woman around the same age as me who is sort of poking fun at just the ridiculous nature of how much advice is coming at you from all angles and how some of it is actually contradictory. Like saying, oh, you gotta focus 100%, it's all about protein, 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 protein. But wait, also fiber is king. And also you need to get 10,000 steps, but it's not about cardio, it's actually about strength. So you need to make sure that you're strength training. And then you need to do cold baths and plunges, but you should also have a sauna because it's all about hot exposure. And it's just, we laugh, they go viral because they are a commentary on the fact that we are being bombarded constantly with this information of how we should be living better and how we should be improving and all these things that we need to be doing. And when I see those, I'm right there with them. I am laughing at the just sheer volume of advice we are getting about all the things we have to do. And today I want to talk about this idea of who are you changing for and whose goal is it? Because sometimes I think we start to drift away from what's really ours versus what's someone else's. And we are in this culture where we're constantly consuming content that is made by other people. We hear other people's experiences. We also hear advice, and some of it is legitimate advice coming from professionals that can make a true difference in our life. We should be active. We should be eating well and sleeping well. We know those. But I think what can happen is that we end up with this huge list of all these things and a lot of pressure. And if we are not taking regular action or we don't have momentum in those areas, we can start to feel a source of shame. And then this shame can start to compound as the list grows of all of the things that you should be doing and you should be better at them. And so while it's funny when we look at the list of all the things, it's also sort of disheartening because when you take a look, you might say, but I'm failing on a lot of those measures. Now, obviously I'm using the example of myself, who's a woman in her 40s, but this applies to, I think, everyone. We constantly get advice. So I want to ask the question of, is this really yours? I think it's very easy to just go through the motions, being so caught up in just the day-to-day that it's rare to pause, to stop, and to ask yourself, is this really my goal? Am I changing for me? And actually, a question I think that is really powerful for this is, would I still put effort into this if no one ever knew about it? Like if no one could ever find out that I was putting time and energy into this, would I still prioritize it? Because I think that right sizes our expectations around what we truly care about and maybe what is less important. And it's not to say that it's not important at all, but we get to prioritize what we actually care about. And I think when you ask that question and say, would I still do this? Now you could picture yourself on a desert island. If I was just living on a desert island and I knew it and I had accepted that, would I still make the effort to do this? And I think most of us would focus on some of those foundational habits. We want to take care of ourselves for longevity. We want to live long lives. We want to be healthy, but we all get to choose which direction that we focus our energy. And I think, even though you're not on a desert island and you can tell other people about the things that are important to you, it is a really helpful reframing. Now, I specifically raise this example because although what I teach with the momentum experiment is that, when you feel stuck, when you can't seem to find your momentum, or you start and then you stop, and you keep having these repeated cycles of false starts, it can be really frustrating and you want to figure out where to focus your energy. And the momentum formula focuses on the 3 different types of roadblocks, whether that is you having a logical roadblock, a biological roadblock, or a psychological roadblock. But sometimes we can't quite figure out the answer because it's not even really our goal. And it's actually just not that important to us in the same way that other things are. And so you can put all this time and effort, but at the end of the day, you don't actually want to do it. And so I guess in a way, this is, instead of exploring your why not, it's actually exploring your why and figuring out, is this yours? Is this a goal that you are prioritizing, that you are putting over other things? Now, let's say that you do that work and you say, yes, even if I couldn't tell anyone about this, I would still do it. And even if I take the time to look at the list of things, there are multiple things that are important to me. And yes, I am kind of frustrated and I need to figure out what's going on. I think the next step is also looking at, okay, the goal is mine, but also what does that look like in reality? Because sometimes we need to, of course, correct or right size our expectations of what it looks like right now versus when I'm experienced with this. Anytime we're starting something new, we have this continuum that we fall on as a beginner, as maybe more intermediate, and then as someone who's got this really locked down. And maybe you have an example of something in your life that you have actually been consistent with for a long time. You don't have to put a lot of thought into it. And you are at a more advanced stage of this habit, something that you've got locked down, you've got momentum, and it's just not a question anymore. Maybe there are other people in your life who see you doing that thing and they might admire you for it. And when they start with it, they're comparing themselves to you as someone who's been doing this for a while. We do this as well. We'll look at other people and we'll say, oh man, I want to be like them. And we expect to get to where they are now right away. When in actual fact, there is this continuum and we get there slowly. So I think what can help is if we're feeling overwhelmed with one of these goals that is truly ours, is to start to ask, what does it look like for a beginner? And if you start to focus on, okay, if I want to be like a beginner in this, what does that look like? Because that can also help to just course correct what we're expecting, because I think we can expect too much too soon. But at the end of the day, it needs to be your goal. And I think it's also helpful when you look at, we also might have things that we want other people, we wish they would get better at them and they would change. It can be helpful to also turn it back on ourselves and just say, you know what, it doesn't matter what other people want. It doesn't matter what other people expect. It just matters for me to focus my energy and attention on what it is that I really want. Because when you are changing for yourself, you have that strong why, and then you can start to use all the tools in your toolkit to figure out if you have resistance or if you have been struggling. But if you don't have that strong why and the goal is not truly yours, you're changing because you should or because it's expected from someone else, that's where you're going to get into trouble. And no matter how much time you spend figuring out whether it's, should I work on my method? Should I work on my mode? Should I work on my mindset? I guess the very first question is, who are you changing for? And are you changing for you? And one of the first questions that I ask myself, but also when I work with a client, is to say, how much does it matter? We rate on a scale of how important is this to you, and sitting down and expressing in words what this means. Now that brings me to my segment about a current experiment. And I know over the past few episodes, I've been talking about my experiment with Instagram in my professional life. But today I want to share about my next momentum experiment, which is actually a personal goal of mine. And this is around a consistent strength training routine. Now, this has long been one of my goals, and I know it's one of my goals, but I still, to this day, ask the question, how important is this to you? I also ask, how am I doing with this right now? If I had to give myself a grade, how am I doing? What grade would I give myself? But I also ask, what does this mean to you? So you say it's important, okay, let's describe this in words. So I want to share a little bit about that, because this personal goal of mine is one that it's been long-standing. I've had it for a long time. And yes, we all know that we should be strong, that it helps, especially as you get older, you start to lose muscle mass. You start to also have more risk of injury. And I am a person who I love to travel, and I want to be mobile, and I want to not be limited by physical constraints as much as possible within my control. And I know that having a consistent strength routine is something that's going to do that. But the one thing that's been consistent in my life is that I have been inconsistent when it comes to exercise. And I'm learning more about myself as I go. Now, I could do an entire separate episode about this, and I am not going to do that, but I am going to give you the Coles Notes version, which is that since teenage years, when I did start getting involved with strength training and getting stronger, I have gone through these periods of being very consistent and then completely inconsistent. And what seems to happen most of the time is injury. For me, I'm someone who gets easily injured. Even as a kid, when I was active, I was in dance and synchronized swimming and gymnastics, I would get injured a lot. And I always knew that I was hypermobile. I was very flexible, very bendy, but it really wasn't until recent years that I learned more about the hypermobility spectrum disorder. And on the far extreme, there's something called Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, or EDS. And I am actually currently working with doctors to figure out where I fall on that spectrum, because it's not just about injuries to your joints, there are other ramifications for connective tissue with your body. And so I finally know about this thing that I didn't know for so long. Now I share that because one of the challenges I had is that I had no concept of this condition and that it's really about connective tissue. There's a deficiency with your connective tissue. And so someone who's hypermobile, they are really bendy. And so they can do things like touch their thumb to their arm. I don't know if you can see that. So that would be an example. It also makes sense why I was in dance and gymnastics and synchronized swimming and all of those. I could do all the party tricks. But it also means that there are complications. So it does mean you can get injured more easily. However, for the last, say, 20, 25 years, I have been participating in things that I didn't realize made me more prone to injury. And so I would go through these cycles of being active, getting injured. Then I would go to physical therapy and then start seeing professionals to get help with it. Then I would go right back into it. Unfortunately, a lot of these professionals I worked with never connected the dots that it was a connective tissue disorder. Now I know that. And so when I go into this experiment, I am really looking at it with more information about myself. But at the end of the day, I have to sit down and say, why does this matter before I look into it? Because if I'm being really honest, I have some hesitation around doing this. Now that's more of the psychological stuff, and I will share about that over the coming weeks as I share about this current experiment of mine. But for today, I just really wanted to talk about the goals. And the goal, it is my own goal. It is something I want to change just for myself. If I lived on a desert island and no one could know about it, I would still want to be strong and try to reduce the chance of injury. Do I want to compete? No. I just want to make sure I have fewer injuries, that I take care of myself, and that I can live a vibrant life and have stamina. And that comes from having a regular routine. I also am taking into account what that looks like. When I picture that goal over a long time, it's not to be the best of the best. It's not to be the strongest ever. It's for me to be stronger enough so that I can feel the difference in my life with stamina, with posture, and being able to live a full life. What I'm going to do over the next few weeks is talk a little bit more about what I am doing now, given more information, given that I'm working with my doctor and professionals and I've got referrals specific to hypermobility and specific to your joints and your connective tissue, that I'm exploring method and mode through a completely different lens. But also as a person who's had a lot of injury, I'm going to be also taking a look at mindset and doing a lot of that work. And I'll be sharing that with you over the coming weeks. But if there's anything I want you to take from today, it's who are you changing for? Because it should be you. And if you're struggling at all, ask yourself the question, is this something that I would do even if no one else was around? Because having a really strong why that comes from you and you alone is going to help you to find your momentum and keep it.